Today on Palliative Perspectives, we're talking to Julie Poon, Sonia Strachan and Bunty Gundry, 3 previous nurses of GV Hospice. Today we're talking about some of the history of hospice. We're in our 37th year this year, so we're just going to reflect on some of the early days and some of the challenges that were faced then and the future of GV Hospice, what we think might happen in the future. So Julie, I believe you were the first nurse employed at GV Hospice.
That's right, in 1989.
So what was that like? Was there a time were you by yourself as the only nurse for a period of time?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. How long would that have been for?
There was the coordinator and myself that did, I think it was about 12 months,
Yeah.
where we provided a 7-day-a-week service, 24 hours a day. So a lot of on-call. It was like stepping into the unknown a little bit. There certainly wasn't the educational possibilities that there are now. I think there was one course that you could do that explored palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that in the very first few months of the service. The unknown was that we were new to general practitioners, just a totally new service in town.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there would have been a lot of liaising with the local GP clinics.
Absolutely, yeah.
To get it out there what you were doing.
Mm-hmm. So liaising with GPs, and I was lucky that I had opportunities to meet with GPs after hours, and I used to generally target a GP that I was looking after their patients so that they could put a face to a name.
Mm-hmm.
And so, generally I'd just say, "Oh, hi, I was talking to you last week. I just thought I'd introduce myself. I work with hospice."
Yeah.
So that was very beneficial from my perspective, and something that I think certainly benefited the service. But yeah, we would occasionally take a patient to the surgery, especially if they were struggling, to see their GPs. Yeah, as well as that, there was a lot of community education. So we were on television every week talking about our service. That was when GMV6, was it GMV?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. A lot of photos in the paper, receiving checks, etc. from organisations. Yeah.
And what did that feel like, getting that community involvement and support so early on with something that's almost like a pilot project, really, in its infancy?
I think Jenny Lewis was absolutely the perfect person for the job, because she had, I think, started intensive care, started the diabetic service. She'd started quite a few services very successfully. So she was perfect because she actually was able to garner a lot of people to support us. Like when we started, we had a tiny little office that we worked out of, and she had a network of people that would come and man our telephone because we didn't have a mobile phone. So these groups of people would come and just sit at the phone for us while we were going out and seeing
So Jules, they'd
patients.
be volunteers that were doing that?
Yeah.
Incredible.
And so with no mobile phone, how did on-call work then?
They had a
back then?
pager.
A pager, yeah.
And the pager was okay, except for one night, and I was actually on call, and we used to leave the pager at work, and it would be switched over to our home phone. And the service that was doing that, it was actually run out of a petrol station, believe it or not. But they used to do all of the paging systems, I believe. Anyway, somebody was dying through the night, and they were trying to contact us, and when I came to work the next morning, the pager was going. Yeah, they hadn't put it through. So I think that was when we got our first mobile, which was a thing about this big that weighed a tonne. That was pretty special. Build our muscles up anyway.
It's incredible to think what we have now. It's amazing. So you wore a few hats through your journey
Absolutely,
with
all of
GV
them.
Hospice. So you would have been with the service about 10 years when you took on the manager role or coordinator role back then, which is equivalent of our CEO role today. What was that like to have to suddenly take that on, or did you feel that you were already part of the inner sanctum, I guess, being that the only sort of clinician early on as well with funding and, there was no funding at the start.
Really, I took that job on because my dear friend Jenny Tuatha, so there were two Jennys who were coordinators, Jenny Lewis, who was just magic, Jenny Tuatha, fantastic women. And she was going back to Melbourne. And they'd advertised for her position and there were really no takers at all. And so they asked me if I'd do it, which I took it on as a, yes, I'll do it. And my aim was to do it until we got funding for our on-call service.
Mm-hmm.
So once that happened, I was a pretty happy girl. Taking it on, I was absolutely out of my depth. I'm very comfortable with being responsible for myself, but being responsible for a group of people, quite a different thing altogether.
And it would have been around that time that Bunty joined the crew?
Absolutely,
Was
she was
it?
headhunted.
Headhunted. So how did that come about for you, Bunty? How did you suddenly decide to work at hospice?
Well, I'd been working with Jenny Lewis for many years prior to hospice, and Jules as well. And we'd both had our families and we were working night duty at the GV.
Yep.
And Jules said to me, I was getting restless, and Jules said to me, there's a job being advertised with a woman by the name of Jenny Lewis. What do you think about it? And I said to her, well, if it's anything to do with Jenny Lewis, it's going to be good fun and successful. Go for it. So Jules did, and she was successful, and I left the GV and went to a small country hospital in my hometown. And Jules was at me all the time. Bunt, will you come and work with us? And, you know, the devil you know's better than the one you don't. And so I didn't come for many years. And then I'd had, you know, palliative care was a really new discipline. And you know, we weren't doing palliative care well in the country hospitals, probably nowhere really in the hospital setting. And I'd had a horrendous weekend with this poor man who was dying. And, you know, it was distressing for me as well. And Jules just happened to get to me again that week. So she got me
Week
just
moment.
In the supermarket.
So she got me just at the right time probably. And I had an interview, which was an hilarious interview here at hospice. No, not here, at Old Packham Street. And before I got to the car park, they'd come running out to say, you've got the job. But then they said, when I was employed, they said, well, Bunt, the only thing is we can't guarantee that you'll be employed for 2 weeks, 2 years or 20 years. And I said, look, it doesn't matter. I'm happy to come. I know that I can get a job wherever I wish, really. Nursing, you know, they were desperate for nurses. And yeah, some 20 years later, I was still there.
Wow. Terrific.
Yeah, so...
It was a funny interview, wasn't it? Because Bunt and I got together beforehand and we talked about the process and the right words to use in the interview. And I can remember when Bunt walked out of the office, Pat Gibson said to me, what do you think, Jules? I said, well, you would need to employ her. We need to employ Bunty. And that was when she said, okay, if you want to, here we go.
Oh, wow. And so in the early years, there wasn't always guaranteed wages, am I
No,
correct
absolutely
in that?
not. At one
Yep.
stage, we had a month's worth of money left.
Yeah.
That's what they were warning me about.
Yeah. And so what did that mean for each of you, though? Like, how did that sit with you, I guess? Was the cause greater than that worry? But thinking of today, that would be a real worry if something like this was to start now.
I lived
So-
with that uncertainty for probably, well, it was not quite the 10 years, but it wasn't too far from that. But I knew my husband was working, so I knew that I was going to eat.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you're right. This is good nursing. This is really good nursing.
Yeah.
It's very meaningful. It's just something that you want in your life. To know, you know, the beginning of life and the end of life are both very important times because it's the only chance you have.
Yep. And you can only do it once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. And then Son, you came and joined the team
I
in
did.
2001, you said?
2001 I came, yeah. But it's interesting because as a very young nurse, nursed in a few different places, and I was actually back in my hometown of Numurkah and I did some district nursing. So this had been in the, you know, the 90s, and this was a time when, you know, again, just a little service, and when we had a palliative patient, GV Hospice Care were our consultants, and we'd ring them and they were an incredible support, and I got, incredible enjoyment out of, being able to work with the district nurses and in conjunction with GV Hospice Care, who were a great support when we were able to support people in our local town to die at home. And I went overseas and came back and actually gained a position. And again, it was, we're talking in the late 90s, when there wasn't a lot of palliative care educational opportunities, and I knew palliative care was the stream I wanted to get into. And a position was advertised in the Herald Sun on a Saturday morning, and it was a position at Werribee Mercy Hospital, and they'd employ you for 12 months, but also support you to start your grad dip in palliative care through the Australian Catholic University. You had to pay for it, but it meant that they'd employ you and you'd get 1 day off a week to go to classes. And I actually applied for that and got it, and worked on a palliative care ward at Werribee Mercy, did my first year of my grad dip, and my plan was to stay there. And in late 2000, it must have been, there was an advertisement with GV Hospice Care for I think it was a 0.8 position. And GV Hospice Care was held up. It was up here, like it was the absolute, if you wanted to work in palliative care,
Bit of the pinnacle, was
absolutely.
It? Yep.
And I'm like, oh, will I go back home? And I actually thought there's no way that I would get this. Anyway, I did have an interview, but prior to that, when I was doing my, in my first year of my grad dip, I actually did a week's placement here at GV Hospice Care and got to work with these guys and went out with Bunty, who mentored me. And I could just see what an incredible service it was. Anyway, I got the job and I come back, and the rest is history, and left in 2014.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So that would have been one of the few palliative care education opportunities, like you said. And even now, there's not lots out there even now, all these years later. And even in the medical world, we still find 37 years on, that palliative care is still in its infancy as a point of difference, isn't it, compared to other elements of the medical world. Was that challenging for you guys in the early days?
We had an amazing team, absolutely. So palliative care in this area actually started from a meeting of, I don't know whether you could say it was a community meeting, but there was a Lady Fairley had died, and the daughter was very unhappy with the care. She wanted to just take her mother home, but there were no services that would support her. Adrian Bunkle was really important in that, building up the service, seeing the need for the service, and his involvement was amazing over 15 years at least.
Probably longer.
So from a perspective of, we had a clinical committee that comprised of a general practitioner, Adrian as a physician. We actually had Roger Coates for a while, who was a local surgeon. He was a very good lateral thinker. And then we also had a psychiatrist that worked with us for some years, and they would meet with us on a weekly basis and help us with direction. And like I said before, there was very little education that you could do. There was a lot of reading, perhaps, that you could pursue, but very little university-based education. So it also gave us that step forward of knowing what's likely to happen and what do we need to do to be able to reduce those symptoms. And it was also a very supportive framework for us. From a general practitioner perspective, maybe sometimes I think some of them might have seen us as a bit of a threat, but most of them were wholeheartedly on side.
Yep.
Because it was like you might get a GP that would, if you'd ring surgery asking for a script, and when I think about it, sulfate, which is something that you use as your basic pain control, the mixture had an expiry date of 3 days. So every 3 days we ring the general practitioner to write scripts. I'm sure it must have driven them nuts. But that's just the way it was. They didn't make anything with a longer shelf life. And the pharmacist had to make it up as well. So, yeah, some GPs would say, basically, I'll talk to you later on. But we also didn't have time to be put on hold. It was like, I just need this, I need this quickly. I don't need to have a great big long conversation with you. And I think by vast majority of GPs loved us because we were reducing their emergency calls.
But I think, Jules, the work that you and Jenny Lewis and Jenny Trauthor did in those foundation days to, I suppose, educate and get those GPs on side. And it was a great time because it was a time in communities where GPs didn't change. We had the same GP. So when I come on board, I always found that the GPs were always so receptive, and if you rang and said you were from hospice, it was most of the time you got through because it wasn't for rubbish. You were well prepared, you were well versed in what you needed. And the other beautiful thing was, how many times would we meet the GPs after hours to do a home visit with someone? And all these people and the clinical team of Adrian and Paul and all that, they gave all that time for free. They weren't getting paid,
which is hard to comprehend.
Unbelievable.
Isn't it? It's amazing.
And they did it to support us. Like those Monday clinical meetings, like we'd all stay behind and we didn't get paid. It was what we did. But it was an incredible learning opportunity. But also a lot of, sometimes, especially for someone younger who was just starting, that reassurance that you were on the right track, you were doing the right things. Sometimes they could be hairy and a bit feisty. But overall, they were, when I look back on that, I think how privileged I was to be able to sit in on that. And the other thing when we were on call was you could call Adrian and Paul. It didn't happen very often, but every now and then you'd get this particular patient that you might have been really struggling with over the weekend and you weren't sure what to do, and you could actually ring. You've done
all the processes, and you're thinking, what else?
And you could actually ring them and get that. And you didn't have to do it very often, but you actually could, and they were so helpful and so receptive.
Oh, that's brilliant. And the on-call, were you paid on-call back then?
Yeah.
No, it was actually because we were working within such a fine budget and relying on donations, and you don't know what donations you're going to get. We actually did time in lieu, which then took away from the hours that you were working. So, there was a lot of manipulation happening.
And it was time in lieu, as in if you took a 3-minute phone call, it was 3 minutes time in lieu. You didn't do... but that changed. That all changed, in time.
Well,
but
you
at
would
the
be
start,
back paid.
But, I was just saying before, our on-call, because there wasn't many of us, but you know what? Our on-call service was just what made our service, and that was the beauty. It was just like a golden egg for people to have that.
Proud to say it still is.
Absolutely.
The point of difference that hospice has.
But it was hectic because if it was your on-call weekend, you worked Monday, you worked all week, and you're on-call Monday, you're on-call Wednesday, and then you're on-call Friday, Saturday, Sunday, back there Monday. So it was pretty hectic.
Yeah.
But we did it.
And how many would it rotate through when you were there, Son? How many nurses were on
So
board
I think there was 4 of us.
3 when I might have started.
Yeah, so the weekends come quickly.
Yeah,
They did.
absolutely
Coming
they
around
did.
quickly.
But it was just what you
When
did.
it was only 2 of us.
Yes, absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
I used to actually have to bring my kids with me. They'd stay in the car. Well, imagine what would happen now. Kids in the car. Now, if you're really good, I'll take you to McDonald's or no beeping the horn. Because they were young. They were quite young.
Oh, Jules,
Wow.
it's incredible,
It's
isn't
a different world. Yeah, different world. That's amazing. So I was looking and it said that in 1989 there was about 35, 40 referrals that you would have seen then. And what would a typical day for you look like back when the 3 of you were nursing here at hospice? What would a typical day have looked like for you?
Well, I think we'd come on in the morning and then we'd get our handover and have a chat and decide what we were going to do. Whoever was on call took the patients mainly that were close to dying or were complex. So then we'd divide up the patients. Probably the nurse on call, because hers were more complex, she'd be spending more time with them. And then we'd head on out about an hour later, I'd suppose.
Just had a paper list.
Yeah, just a paper,
Yep.
Right.
Paper list, paper maps to find our way around. They had
They
been
were.
laminated.
But don't you remember we also used to write on the front of the histories how to get there?
Yeah, for the next,
Right,
for the
such and
next,
such
and
a-
they were all paper histories.
Mm.
So you were heading out, you know, with this big bag of paper histories. We did take them out, didn't we? We certainly took them home of a weekend on
Because
call.
we used to
Have
that
a suitcase.
Well, when I started, it was a Harrods bag. It was a big Harrods bag, and you used to take that home. And then we got busier and busier, and we got a little suitcase.
Yeah, and the suitcase was full of a weekend.
I think
can
we got
remember
the
that.
suitcase with a lock when accreditation come along. I think that might have brought that
But
in.
the lovely thing about the nursing was that if I'd get out to someone and all of a sudden you knew that something was happening within that family and you were going to be there for a period of time, that you could call back into the office and let coordinator or whoever was here know that, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to be held up with this particular patient for so long, probably. And it could be the point that they needed a syringe driver, so that was unexpected. And so one of the other nurses would just take on your other patients. It was a very supportive group of nurses we were working with. wasn't it?
Absolutely. Very collaborative.
Yeah, and there was so many hard and sad times, but it was that meeting at lunchtime, you know, and where we'd debrief, and it made you prepare to head on out again. Yeah, it was a beautiful time. I mean, it was a beautiful time of my life because it was the end of my nursing career, and I'd worked through all different areas of nursing. So it was a lovely way for me to end my nursing career. Yeah.
Do you have any special or funny memories of the early days? Anything that
there's
stands out
lots of
particularly?
things. Budget was tight. We used to have to keep her inventory on the toilet paper. That's a true story. Yeah. Jules goes, oh, we're going through a little bit too much.
No, it was a cost-effective fund.
Oh, that's what it was.
I think for us, yeah, there was lots of great things that happened. When we got our cars, you know, the hospice cars, and we were able to take them home when we were on call. That was a real hit, wasn't it? Because Jules and I lived out at Nathalia, so you know we had a bit of a hike in, but our patients never knew where we lived, and if we were on call and you had to come out, you know, several times to the same person, it was a long haul. You had an hour's travelling as well as the time you spent with them, and quite often, you know, you'd get home and that same family would ring back again, and out you'd go again. That happened to me 3 times one night, I remember, on call, and I must admit, by the next morning I was ready to throw it in. But, you know, something happened, and the girls supported me and kept on.
Yeah. I got very
Kept
good at sleeping on the floor at work, purely because if you anticipate or you think that you might get called out again, then I would just stay in Shepparton.
Any other memories?
It was always that, you know, down at Packham Street, that office, it was just so many people coming and going, you know. I always remember Mr. Gall that used to come in once a year on a Friday after the sheep sale with a cheque, and it was on the anniversary of when his wife had died. He'd always, you know, little things like that, and Godfrey Medlin's coming and doing our garden, all these volunteers, the line dancers coming in with a cheque, just everyone wanting to help. And I think that was, and it probably still is, the special thing about hospice, that it's such a, I suppose, a community-owned service, and something that so many people in this community are incredibly proud of and have worked so hard for, and most of them have been touched personally, and that's why, you know, I think that's the special part of this service. There's just so many groups and people involved, and I always felt, you know, when we go to the hospital and you said you were from hospice, there was so much respect, and people wanted to, you know, do as much as they could to help you and stuff. There was great teamwork with the AMBOs.
Oh yeah.
You know, we had a lot to do with them.
While you were supporting people to die at home, as we do still, and we do have a cohort of clients that prefer to pass in the hospital. How did you go managing that logistically back in the day? when you'd have to send someone in.
It wasn't
End of
easy.
life.
It wasn't easy, but we really try and have good communication.
Adrian.
We had Dr. Bunkle a
We
lot
had
of the time.
Bunty and we had
Yeah.
Les Fisher,
Yeah.
and there were a couple of older physicians who have obviously passed now. But they were pretty supportive. You just give them a ring and look, this patient's having difficulties and family aren't able to keep on doing it.
We also had great relationships with the nursing supervisors and the medical ward and also the emergency department. And, you know, sometimes, and then we ended up getting a direct admission of policy that we worked on, but of course there has to be a bed. And sometimes they would have to go into emergency. I think we had a real presence, a real physical presence where, you know, we'd often go up and meet them there and stuff.
They didn't physically have a palliative care unit back in those days.
No.
So,
And then we got a bed at Ave Maria.
that's right. I'd forgotten about that.
So there was lots of challenges, but there was lots of little things we did to try. You know, nothing was perfect. It never is it?
No.
But I think that physical presence and you know, that real
That follow-through.
absolutely, and communication. And we had continuity of staff.
Yeah,
I think
big difference.
that was another thing, and experienced staff. Like I was the newbie and the freshie, where we had these other nurses that have been around for a long time with incredible experience.
And so you still serviced in the beginning the whole of Greater Shepparton?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We also
Yeah.
would have phone calls from people who were outside of our area.
Yeah.
I actually remember one specifically. It was a med student, I think, like way out of our area, Rushy or somewhere like that, whose parent was dying and they really wanted to look after them. Tatura, I think, was also an area that we weren't initially covering, and we would get phone calls from there. You can't say no to people that need that. So we would go out, do an assessment, lend equipment, get them on the track, and then do a 24-hour service.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that they could ring if they were having problems.
Yeah.
But we also had had funding. I think Paul O'Dwyer, the GP, was sort of in charge of this. He organised funding through the Division of General Practice. And for a period of time we covered from Finley down to Seymour, Dookie, over in the west even towards Stanhope. Yeah, it was a lot of travelling.
Yeah.
And I did that for 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
What about carting the equipment around? Recliners, Bunty,
Putting recliners
in a little Toyota Corolla
Seeker.
hatchback.
Oh my goodness.
No wonder we've got sore backs.
Bunt and I took a recliner out to a patient one day, and this man, the patient's husband, stood at the front door in his jocks and watched Bunt and I struggle to get this massive electric recliner out of the thing, and just watched us do it. We're like, what the hell are we doing? Don't know about OH&S. God, we used to cut some those big oxygen concentrators.
Yes.
initially we used to do cylinders.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Oxygen cylinders.
I'm sure there were no OH&S issues carting them around.
We got a trolley.
I used to always put a belt around the concentrator in the front seat.
Yes, like a baby.
Very, very safety conscious.
But you know what? Those concentrators, again,
amazing.
were amazing. They weren't cheap. They were donated, and they allowed people to stay at home. You know,
Because the
And
cylinders
still do.
became...
we just had them.
Still do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
cylinders
equip-
certainly became unworkable because they would empty out too quickly and they didn't have the same devices that were oxygen sparing. So, yeah, I can still see Jenny Lewis doing one of those and thinking, you're in your 60s, girl. Shouldn't be doing that.
And all the fundraising that staff got involved with. You know, we're on the Fruit Loop, and then our memorial service that Bun had so much to do with. A lot of people did a lot of stuff in their own time because they loved the service. Yeah.
Yeah, the memorial services were beautiful and loved by so many, and even for us quite emotional, weren't they? Yeah, the music, you know, they were all volunteered, the musicians, and they were fabulous.
It's really a service that you give a part of yourself to,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
You
not
didn't
many
mind.
jobs where you have that.
No, we had such wonderful social events too, and I think that was just the group
Oh, you
that
just
we
reminded
were.
me.
Yeah.
We had so much fun,
Yeah.
didn't we, and laughter, and it's one of the nurses would be on call at one of these functions, and even just that was in itself was hilarious. Some of the calls we'd get, but I think that made it too,
Absolutely it did.
that loving. We didn't mind, like you said, Annie. You know, a lot of your time was given, and you know, even when we only got paid 5 minutes for
But you need those social gatherings
Yeah.
too. It's
Yeah.
a heavy role,
It was a heavy
you
role.
know, and
Yeah.
Gee, we had a big party after our first accreditation. Big party, that didn't we? It was fabulous. So we're so
got
happy
to celebrate
it was
the
over.
milestones.
Yes.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, we did a lot of that.
And we didn't waste anything because things were so tight, and you know there's no way that you'd be able to, you know, like saving, I don't know, are we allowed to say this, but you know, like keeping drugs, that we weren't throwing anything out,
No.
No.
you know, it'd be recycled if we could.